So so tell me the truth. Just give it to me straight, like Christian or not a Christian?
All right, let me do a little game here. Identify the Christian president. Okay,
All right.
and um, let's see if I can get it to come up a piece at a time. No, it's not going to work. So I usually draw up a piece at a time. It makes it more effective. But uh, President A was a Baptist who claimed to be a Christian, took communion publicly, and actually got in trouble for that, and had an advisory council of evangelical ministers. President B was an Episcopalian, never claimed to be a Christian, refused to take communion, and was publicly chastised by his minister because of it, and his advisors all denied the fundamentals of Christianity. Which is which? And the second one is George Washington. The Baptist, who claimed to be a Christian, took communion publicly, had advisory council of evangelical ministers. That's Bill Clinton. The
Wow.
Episcopalian, who never claimed to be a Christian, who refused to take communion and was publicly chastised by his minister because of it, and his advisors denied the fundamentals of Christianity. That's George Washington.
Wow.
So let's talk about about Washington. Unlike Adams and even Jefferson, Washington never claimed to be a Christian. We have 20,000 pages of his writing, and he never claimed to be a Christian, nor did he ever claim to have a relationship with Jesus or to have been converted. In fact, on March 3rd, 1797, a group of clergymen tried to get him to affirm whether he was a Christian or not. They tried to trick him into answering the question, but they were frustrated when Washington refused to do so. And one of them said, the old fox was too cunning for us. So even when ministers tried to trick him into saying he was a Christian, he wouldn't do it. So what about Washington? He never took communion. So he was publicly chastised for his bad example. And after he did, he never attended a sacrament Sunday. So James Abercrombie, who was the assistant rector of Washington's church, one week chastised Washington from the pulpit for his bad example in not taking communion. Now, Washington's wife, Martha, would stay for communion. And the way the church ran it is you had a service, and then if you wanted, you stayed and took communion. And Martha would stay, but Washington and his granddaughter, Nellie Custis, would leave. This is all in her report of what happened, Nellie Custis. And so Dr. Abercrombie chastised him. Washington sent him a letter, which I've read, in which he said, you were quite right to chastise me. I am setting a very bad example. It won't happen again. And so he just didn't attend on Sacrament Sunday. And the Bishop William White, who was the overseer of the local churches, also testified to this as well. Now, I'm going to give you a number of things. Does the fact that he never took communion automatically absolutely mean that he wasn't a believer? No, but it means that he wasn't obedient to one of the sacraments that believers are supposed to take. And why was he so adamant about refusing to do it? That's an interesting question.
Hmm.
He spoke of Christians in the third person. He said, being no bigot myself to any mode of worship, I am disposed to indulge the professors of Christianity that road to heaven, which to them shall seem the most direct, plainest, easiest, and least liable to exception. Now, we got to explain a couple of things here. The word bigot in the 18th century, one of the things that you have to do also that other people, when they're doing these things, they don't translate 18th century language into our language, and they give people wrong impressions. So bigot here just simply means someone who has a firm commitment to a doctrine, a firm commitment to something, in this case, religion. And he says he's no bigot to any mode of worship. Okay?
Hmm.
So he doesn't have any commitment to any particular mode of worship, but he's disposed to allow professors of Christianity. That doesn't mean a professor like me. That means people who profess Christianity, the road to heaven, which to them seems most direct, plainest, easiest, and least liable to exception. This is because Washington believed in multiple roads to heaven. These theistic rationalists believed that there were various roads or ways to get to heaven. And so he said, I'm not a bigot to any type of motive. I don't have a particular commitment to any type of worship, but people who believe in Christianity, I'm inclined to let them believe what they want and take the easiest road to heaven that they can find. He studiously avoided mentioning the name of Jesus. In 20,000 plus pages of his writings, there's only one reference to the word Jesus, Jesus Christ, or Christ. And that reference is not in his handwriting and is not accepted as Washington's by the Smithsonian or the Washington Papers Project. It was written by an aide of his who was a Christian. He had an aide who was a Christian, and sometimes the aide would put Christian language in speeches or communiques that he was sending out, and then Washington would change it. For example, I mentioned before this concept of God words in the Declaration of Independence. Washington always used God words in place of any term specific to Christianity, the Bible, or any other religion. Words like divine hand or author or things like that, or providence. For example, in a speech to Indian leaders that were written by this Christian clerk, he crossed out the word God and substituted the Great Spirit above. Now, why did he do that? Because to the Indian leaders, they view God as the Great Spirit above. And to him, it doesn't matter because God can have a bunch of different names. It's not the Christian God. It's not the triune God of the Bible. It's not Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, and God the Father. And so you can substitute other names, and it doesn't matter if that's what helps the Indians, think about God. I don't know if I want to go down this road too much, but his use of God words and his belief that all roads lead to God are best understood when one remembers that Washington was an enthusiastic Freemason. Now, those who push the Christian America idea will tell you that Washington, yeah, he was technically a Freemason, but he didn't ever do anything with it. Well, he laid the capital cornerstone in a Masonic apron with a Masonic trowel. His favorite portrait of himself was him in his Masonic regalia. And there is a George Washington Masonic memorial, including the chair that he sat in as the master of the Alexandria Lodge. So he was more than casually a Mason. And I don't want to get into the whole Mason conspiracy thing. I always tell people, don't come up afterwards and tell me about the dollar bill or anything like that. I've seen all of that, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe any of that stuff.
Oh, you're going to be getting lots of emails now.
Yeah, I know. But he and Franklin were Masons. There's not a conspiracy by Freemasons to take over the world, blah, blah, blah. That's not the thing. That's not the important thing. The thing is, Freemasonry had certain religious beliefs, and they fit squarely with what Washington and Franklin believed. Freemasonry holds to a unitary supreme being, the so-called great architect of the universe. It denies Christ's unique saviorship and atonement. It reduces religion to a moralistic observance of allegedly common ethical principles. Everyone meets together and pray and worship together to the same one and only indivisible God whom all religions acknowledge and venerate. And you still see that today in the prayer meetings that they have, congressional prayer meetings and White House prayer meetings and so forth, in which everybody can go, everybody can participate. It doesn't matter what God they worship. It's the same notion. Some other things about Washington. He also steadfastly refused to kneel in prayer. Oh, well, people will say, well, that doesn't mean he's not a Christian. I don't kneel in prayer either. Well, this was the custom in his church. It was expected. If you go and see the churches, you'll find kneeling benches there because everybody was expected to kneel in prayer. So here's a 6'3" guy in an age in which the average male was 5'8" at best, mostly 5'6" or so. John Adams was barely 5 foot, and he's 6'3", and he's standing while everybody else is kneeling. But more importantly, it puts the lie to one of the sort of famous stories about Washington and being in prayer at Valley Forge. And not everybody, there's a lot of portraits out there, right, of Washington next to his horse kneeling at Valley Forge in the snow. But the man who was supposed to have found Washington kneeling in prayer at Valley Forge, a farmer named Isaac Potts, reported that he was nowhere near Valley Forge in 1777 when it supposedly happened. He moved there near the end of the war. This was one of many stories concocted by a guy named Mason Locke Weems, or Parson Weems, who, when Washington died, he wrote a hagiography. That means a glowing biography that exaggerates things. He wrote a glowing biography of Washington, which is the source of a number of the Washington myths, like the cherry tree story. That's where that comes from. And some of the other things that are said about Washington, like the Indians supposedly trying to kill him and they couldn't kill him, and those kinds of things. Those are, or my favorite, when I visited Mount Vernon, when I knew I was going to Washington, D.C. to speak at a conference, I made sure I carried a silver dollar with me so that I could stand on the shore of the Potomac River in front of Mount Vernon. And I had my wife take a photograph of me ready to throw, because I was going to throw the silver dollar across the Potomac, which Mason Locke Weems said Washington did. And if you look at the picture, you'll see the Potomac there is a mile wide. So the idea that Washington threw the silver dollar across the Potomac is not very likely. It's actually based on a true story. He and another friend were competing for the affections of a young lady when he was young, and he bet the other guy that he could skip a rock across the Rappahannock River, which was about 100 yards across. So skipping a rock 100 yards turned into throwing a silver dollar a mile. And these are the stories that Mason Locke Weems created. When we were standing in the bedroom where Washington died, everybody's looking at the bed and I'm at the ceiling. My wife said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm looking at how well they patched the ceiling, because Mason Locke Weems said that the angels came down and pulled him up and directly into heaven." So you have all of these mythical stories that people have now taken and made portraits. There's even a Washington at Valley Forge memorial somewhere that celebrates on a big iron doors and so forth. But it's just made up. Bishop White, who was one of the ministers and churches that Washington attended at various times, said this on his death: "I do not believe that any degree of recollection will bring to my mind any fact which would prove General Washington to have been a believer in the Christian revelation." Or Reverend Samuel Miller, who was the pastor of another church that Washington attended on occasion: "How was it possible for a true Christian to die without one expression of distinctive belief or Christian hope?"
Wow.
Now, these guys have no reason to sully the memory of this great man, and they had great respect for him and so forth. They're just telling the truth that people don't want to hear. And then I go into why people say and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
so there's some things about Washington, and I'm not trying to sully his reputation either. I'm a list person. My students know I'm a list person. I have lists for everything. And one of my lists is the 10 greatest Americans. And on my list of the 10 greatest Americans, George Washington is numbers 1 through 5, literally. And so I think Washington was a great man, but I don't think he had to be a Christian in order to be a great man or to make great contributions, and neither do the others.